Good morning, and thank you for coming. We gather here this morning to honor and congratulate and continue to learn from our friend and colleague Max Bazerman, who is the winner of the 2019 Lifetime Achievement Award of the Organizational Behavior Division of the Academy of Management. Max is well known to many of us for his research on judgment decision-making, negotiations, and ethics, where he has literally written the book on many of these topics. And so his accomplishments are well known to us just by being members and citizens of the field. Max is also another kind of contribution beyond his direct publications and his own productivity is how he has had a multiplier effect through the lives of others. Many of them are students, others are colleagues. But as I read through his nomination letters this morning, I had to set my alarm for about 5:30 to get through them all, of course. But those letters are as much about the meaningful impact that Max has had on the lives of developing scholars as they are about cataloging Max's accomplishments as a scholar himself. Lifetime Achievement Awards seem like they have a sense of closure and that something has now been done. And so I will simply say that yes, Max has accomplished a lot, much has been done, but we know that he's a very active scholar and will continue to contribute. So I hope that we'll view this as just a pause and a moment to congratulate and marvel at what Max has accomplished and look forward to more to come. So Dolly Chugg will represent this long list of people who Max has influenced in his life to say a few words on behalf of the nominators.
I should start with an apology to Jeff. I emailed him on behalf of Don Moore and me a few months ago and said, hey, there was a thought of maybe nominating Max Bazerman for this award. Would you be open to additional nomination letters from others? And I suspect I might have implied like one or two other letters, and then we put a request out to many people in this room, and I'm pretty sure he received about 15 letters, probably 20 to 30,000 words from this group. So thank you, Jeff, for your patience, to you and the committee. Most of us who've exchanged emails with Max at any point in our lives have at some point received an email that ends with "do good things." Do good things. Raise your hand if he's ever told you to do good things. Yes. And I think when I first started seeing that appearing in my inbox, it just seemed sort of like a neutral do good things. But the further I've gotten into understanding how Max works, where his scholarship comes from, the deeper those three words seem to me. For example, another thing I can apologize to Jeff for is that I got very confused about which award we were talking about and which awards Max had gotten in the past and which ones he hadn't. And that's partially, I know, it's hard. And what I realized was we've got a somewhat unicorn situation where Max has received many of the most distinguished awards the Academy and other organizations have to offer for mentorship and education. But he's also received awards like this one, which are titled things like Lifetime Achievement Award, which has a spirit of individuality to it, of individual scholarship. And I think what makes him a unicorn is that he receives both of those, and one might think that means he's sort of good at two things. But that's the amazing part of do good things, is they're the same thing to him. The scholarship is the mentorship is the scholarship. This is how the work happens. And the multiplier effect that Jeff so aptly described is what captures his outlook on how good things happen. Good things happen through people. Good things happen through teaching. Good things happen through collaboration. That is what good looks like. That is what great scholarship looks like. Ann Ten Brunsel, Kim Wade Benzoni, and Tina Diekman put together a slideshow. I think it was on the occasion of Max's birthday at some point, and they titled it The Max Effect. The Max Effect looks like this generational ripple that has resulted in not only him having a very long CV, but lots and lots of generations of people, some of whom he's advised directly, and others who have been collaborators of those advisees or advisees of those advisees, also having CVs with work that is high quality and continuing throughout their lifetimes, long after they've worked with him directly, if they ever have. The Max Effect is one in which the scholarship is happening in conjunction with other people, and it aligns with how we live our lives. What I'm really excited about with what Max is going to share with us in his remarks today is that we're going to get to see behind the scenes intellectually how he thinks about going through the world and living life, and it's exactly the Max Effect. It is the how you do good things. So Max, we know you have many good things ahead, that you have done good things, and you are doing good things, and that you will continue to do good things. On behalf of everyone in this room, we want to thank you for letting us do good things with you.
It seems easiest to say we should quit now. That was very nice. But I thought I should provide reciprocal evidence that I need all these people. So this group are just people who have some connection to one or more of the slides that follow, some of which I may not get to. The longer list of people who let me do what I do is far longer than this and includes many other people in this room. But I wanted to provide evidence of the importance of these other people. And I was trying to think about how to do it, and I could sort of tell you about all of my colleagues. But there's only two people in the room who knew me before I ran into these other people who have been so central. One's my spouse of 40 years, Marla, who's here. And next to Marla is the best man at our wedding, Dave Scorman, who knew me a year before I met Marla, because we were first-year graduate students together. And so one way to kind of clarify the importance of these other people is to give you some indicator of how well I was doing on my own before I ran into these people. Okay, and to put this into context, David, I wasn't talking to David about the next slide. I didn't tell him anything about what I was talking about, but he mentioned that our class was the first class that had more than one person graduate from this program. The program we were in was not a pleasant program. I think that the sort of the dropout, fail-out rate was on the somewhere around 40%, and we knew that. We knew that this is a tough environment. I'll skip the process, but we were scared. And in the midst of that, so here's, I was supposed to get this letter in December of my first year, but I wouldn't consider our faculty all that well organized, so I didn't get it until February. So this is my first year feedback report, and that's too small to read. I'm not sure how to make this grow. But if you can't read it and want to get closer, feel free. My screen doesn't really allow me to. But it basically suggests that I'm pretty incompetent. Okay, and this certainly led to thoughts that I should be looking for an alternative career pursuit. I was told to go get sort of statistical advice from somebody who wasn't remotely capable of giving me useful statistical advice. This is just a mess. But this is how I was doing sort of on my own. So back to this group and the others that follow, thank you. I was in trouble without you. Okay, but I also want to spend just a little bit of my limited time talking about the state of the field long ago. If anybody knows how to change this screen, if we have any, if the audio-visual team knows how to make it so that I can see the whole picture, that would be great. If not, not a big deal. Thanks, Dolly, but don't worry too. I'll be okay without it. To give you a sense of the state of the field, sort of about 7 months after this letter, I think Dolly's going to make magic happen. David and I were teaching our own sections of undergraduate intro OB. Marla was in the class as a student, and David and I were looking for something more contemporary in terms of textbooks. So what our faculty was using in the MBA program we found to be a little bit dated. Again, the year is 1977. And this is the book that, thank you, Dolly, that's perfect. What would you just,
Oh, but that's,
Oh, I see, got it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Do you want me to keep
can
fiddling?
I can look over here, I'll be okay.
okay.
Yeah. So this is the textbook, Philly House and Kerr, and I thought you might be interested in knowing what the field looked like then. Again, it got a little small. But we had spent multiple weeks on motivation, multiple weeks on leadership. And this is too small to read, so I'm going to go a little bit faster. And what's not remotely in that is behavioral decision research. So this is after the Kahneman-Tversky science paper, multiple years after the Kahneman and Tversky science paper, but OB wasn't remotely aware of that world. Negotiations wasn't. There was, in the Philly House and Kerr book, there was a chapter on conflict resolution, which basically had to do with measuring your conflict style, which some of you would know I'm not such a big fan of. And there's nothing in the book on ethics. Okay, so these topics just weren't in the field that I was introduced to. In terms of perspective, description is what OB did. We described the way the world worked, okay? And we kind of knew about economists as other strange people in the business school who wrote formal models about what optimal behavior would look like, but we really didn't interact with them much other than if they were sort of in the doctoral student carols late at night. But the descriptive and the normative world were not remotely connected. And prescription, that's what consultants did. And that was treated as a bad thing as opposed to a different thing. So prescription was just kind of not a very pleasant word. And I think that the field has moved pretty dramatically. And it's moved on, and I'm going to show it on my favorite topics, but I think we could do it on some other topics as well. If we go back to the 1970s, the normative side was game theory that told us what super-rational actors would do. There was a descriptive literature on how negotiators behaved, and these literatures had nothing to do with each other. Okay? These were not cross-referencing literatures. They were completely distinct literatures. And I think that the topic of negotiations took off when Howard Rafer wrote his book on an asymmetrically prescriptive, descriptive approach to negotiation. Or if we assume human behavior rather than purely rational behavior, how would we think about giving good advice to people? And then Maggie and I and lots of other people did a whole bunch of research to basically fill in this prescriptive framework by better understanding what descriptions can the focal person expect in the other side, and what mistakes does the focal negotiator need to worry about in terms of his or her own behavior. The critical thing here is that I think it's Rafer's 82 book that dramatically changed the field of negotiation by turning it into a prescriptive world rather than normative and descriptive, which really sort of don't fulfill what professional schools are all about, which is helping to change the behavior of future professionals. And I think that's Howard Rafer, by the way, getting an honorary doctorate at Northwestern in the 90s. That's Danny Kahneman. So now I want to show the same picture on decision making. So if we go just to the last millennium, on the normative side, we had neoclassical economics. On the descriptive side, we had behavioral decision research. And both are obviously robust intellectual areas. But this millennium has seen a rapid increase in the interest of the real world in the area of how we make decisions. And I think that that's occurred as the field has moved prescriptive again, in terms of addressing what do we do about the fact that we don't make decisions as rationally as we want. And there certainly had been an attempt to be prescriptive. As early as '82, Baruch Fischoff wrote a very nice paper on, while we're getting pretty good as of '82 at identifying biases, we don't know anything about how to debias people. And now it's a lot of years later, and I'd say that's exactly where we are. We're more confident than ever that we don't know how to debias human intuition. But the prescriptions that have worked are the idea that if we can have people aware that Malcolm Gladwell was shockingly wrong, and that our intuition is very, very limited, we can lead people to think about when they need to engage their system 2 thinking so that they can make wiser decisions. So let your system 1 biases run wild on trivial decisions, but when you're doing the important stuff, figure out how to engage multiple system 2 processes to make wiser decisions. And similarly, the whole choice architecture or nudge world of Thaler and Sunstein is about how leaders can construct environments that will lead people to make wiser decisions despite their descriptive limitations. So despite the fact that decision-making has this long history with sort of terrific people doing terrific scholarly work, it's really the solving what is a prescriptive opportunity that's made the real world so much more interested in our work. And I'm going to now spend that's Max's version of history. Obviously, many of you might not agree with that. I'm going to spend the rest of the talk doing the same structure on the topic of ethics. And that's kind of what I'm working on now. I sent Dolly a little more than half of the chapters from the book I'm working on called Better Not Perfect. She just handed me the marked up copy filled with comments. And Better Not Perfect is very related to this slide. So I'm now describing the way the world is now. Okay, that on the normative side, you have philosophers who identify the way you should make decisions, and the should varies based on what philosophical theory you pay attention to. I'm certainly most comfortable with utilitarianism, which suggests that your moral decision is the one that maximizes cumulative utility across all sentient beings. That includes animals that are sentient. And that means maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain, or maximizing cumulative utility, but instead of, for you, maximizing it for all sentient beings, which is kind of the best thing you could possibly do. And all philosophical theories I find remarkably demanding, in the sense that if you hold yourself up to the standard of are you maximizing the good you can do? No. Like, the number of ways that pretty good people fall short of doing the most they can do is kind of stunning. So this is kind of problematic. I see some folks who have published in the goal-setting literature, and we know that impossible goals are not the best ones to set. And yet, that's kind of what philosophy provides for us, is a set of impossible standards. And as a result, there's significant empirical research that studying philosophy, or even pursuing moral philosophy, doesn't seem to create any change in the morality of one's behavior. So there's lots of evidence that this is not a particularly wonderful pursuit if your goal is to change people's behavior to make it more ethical. Again, there's no criticism here of philosophy as an intellectual topic. I'm an enormous fan of Peter Singer, the most famous contemporary philosopher and the leader of the utilitarianism perspective. But I think that there are limits in terms of philosophy, in terms of guiding our behavior. And on the descriptive side, we have lots of people in this room who are a part of a field called behavioral ethics, which is something that emerged past sort of post-Enron, when the world said to professional schools, you're creating monsters, you should do something about this. And we didn't know what to do about it. But one thing that we have done is create a large body of research. Lots of people in this room are part of that, on describing the ways in which people behave, and I would say more specifically and more interestingly, the way perfectly good people behave and simply end up doing some things that are pretty wrong on a regular basis. Okay. I'm now going to make the same criticism that I've been making on the previous two slides, and that is, I think that we want to move beyond describing to figure out how to change behavior. And for me, I'm going to take a utilitarian perspective on what I mean by that. How do we change behavior to lead people to do better? And do better, you can, again, think of in terms of moving toward the utilitarian standard without the expectation that you'll actually get there. So that's what I want to describe, sort of a prescriptive approach to thinking about ethics. And I'm interested in how to get people to behave better. Okay, so I'm going to talk about sort of two approaches to this. The second one I may get to with very limited time, and I'll do in summary fashion. So one is developing a system 2 ethical orientation, and the other is nudging. And nudging, I think of, that's the job of managers and leaders, because their job is to affect not only their own ethical behavior, but the ethical behavior of the people that they have the opportunity to influence. So the simple argument for developing a system 2 ethical orientation is not only does our system 2 lead to better decisions in system 1, it also leads to more ethical decisions in our system 1. So what people intuitively do is not as ethical as what they would do if they deliberated. So a simple version of this is, from now on, when you have an ethical decision, stop and think about it rather than trusting your intuition. But that's kind of a little bit limited, so we're going to try to expand that. So for this system 2 ethical orientation, which I encourage, one is to define the goal state, which I've already done in this talk, and that's utilitarianism. which I view as a parallel to rationality in the decision-making world. And then I'm going to suggest that we can audit our decisions for what our ethical limitations are. And I'll talk about lots of different things to audit. And then I think we need some viable goal. And I think that the viable goal isn't to achieve the North Star of utilitarianism, but to do better to reach a maximal sustainable level of goodness. So that's kind of what the System 2 orientation looks like. The thing that I think needs some elaboration is, first, what does that mean? So what I want you to imagine is that you're at point A on this chart, and if you simply do something nice for other people where they would gain as much as you, then you'd move from A to C. If you take someone else's money who needs the money as much as you, that theft would move you from A to B. That's obviously not a very nice thing to do. And what I want to do is create a structure so that instead of moving from A to C, you could potentially move from A to F, okay, where you sort of give up a little bit, from A to F, so that you still gain a little bit of benefit for yourself, but you create far more good for the world. And if you sort of want to sacrifice, instead of moving from A to C, move to A to G. Okay? And this idea of moving from A to G rather than A to C, without this graphic is mine. I think the best example of this is the world of effective altruism and the charity domain, where people like Will McCaskill and Peter Singer do a good job of highlighting that the amount of good you can do when you donate your money effectively, that means where it can create the most good, reduce the most suffering, you can probably get 100 to 1 return. So that the horizontal distance from A to G is 100 times the vertical drop, which is a pretty good return on your investment. So if you're into sacrificing to do well, why not do as well as you possibly can? And I'm going to argue that this logic applies beyond philanthropy to lots of things that we do in our life. Okay, and to see that, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we can do. So I may have stolen the word active intelligence from my colleague Bazerman Banaji. I'm not sure. I may have made it up. I just don't remember. But the idea is certainly inspired by a introductory lecture that she gave at Yale University a couple of decades ago, where she basically told these entering 18-year-olds that they have a moral responsibility to develop their intellectual capacity as much as possible during their 4 years at Yale. Okay? And you can substitute your own university. And the basic argument is you can do far more good in the world if you actively manage your intellectual development than if you simply view it as a trade-off between partying and making more money in the future. And if you think of your intellectual capacity as increasing your capacity to do good, then developing your active intelligence is a good way to do this. So, and the idea of active intelligence is to not think about sort of any sort of innate or even innate intelligence or even developed intelligence to date, but thinking about how you can most actively use your intelligence. And again, we know that System 2 is smarter than System 1. Value creation, this is a common term in the negotiations literature, and the simple idea here, which is represented on the prior chart, is that if you are dividing a bigger pie, there's more good in the world. So without being too self-serving for the negotiation folks in the audience, which would include me, when we teach people to create value and to divide a larger pie, I think that we are engaged in a move in a utilitarian direction. And I think that makes sense. I think it's great to think about that in a broader sense. That is, how do we create value, not just in a two-party context, but in the many, many, many party environment that we live in. Waste reduction. Many of you know I'm kind of I don't like waste. So you could think about this in terms of your own behavior. But I also, one of the stories that I find fascinating is Amazon's H2 headquarters bidding system, where they had 238 different locations bidding on being the H2 headquarters. And these communities spent millions of dollars and a large amount of time on consultants to develop proposals. Just a quick thought assignment. How many of them ever had any chance at all? Okay, and none of us can know what the right answer is, but I would think of numbers like 6, 10, 12. And I think that Amazon was broadly abusive of 200 plus other towns who were spending enormous resources and never had any chance. And I think that that's creating a cumulative bad in society. And unfortunately, we have lots of dysfunctional local and state competition that simply fuels that to a massive degree, so that the winning municipalities are giving away far more than it's worth to them. And obviously, there's a story of Amazon pulling out of New York afterwards. So if I told you to be honest, that would be shockingly boring, but honesty is like a good thing, and it creates value. And when we have to spend too much time focusing on how to get people to not be honest, we're engaged in a system of value destruction. But most of you are honest, you're nice people, you're not corrupt. But lots of good people don't notice the bad around them. And not noticing means we allow bad to proliferate. And I'm going to show you, I'm not going to stop and ask you the quiz, because too many of you already know, have already seen this chart. But Ting Zhang and Pinar Fletcher and Francesca Gino and Oval Cesar are all involved in creating this chart. This is my favorite piece of teaching pedagogy that I didn't know of 10 years ago. And the puzzle that people are given, that students are given or executives are given, is that you're an investment advisor and you have a client with moderate wealth, significant wealth, long-term investment perspective, moderate tolerance for risk, and they want to know which of 4 funds to invest a significant chunk of money in. And you're told that you can't pick the S&P 500. Some of you believe in indexing. I believe in indexing, but that would be boring advice. They already understand indexing, and they're interested in your help in picking an actively managed mutual fund. So the S&P 500 there is simply there as a benchmark, and you see the 9-year performance of these 4 other funds. I'll give you a quick hint. Tobacco trade is up there as a red herring. It's like 1 out of 100 people pick tobacco trade, but that's to provide some kind of distraction that this might be about ethics or something like that. And then people are asked, what do they invest in? And you get a kind of 1% on tobacco trade, you get about 10% on alpha, you get about 10% on power trade, and you get lots of people who pick Fortitude. So Fortitude always gets over 70%. That includes MBAs, kind of broad groups of executives, investment bankers, people pick fortitude in large numbers. And after we do this by hand raising, I saved you because most of you would have gotten this problem wrong, as you'll see. I then ask the question, is there anything wrong with any of these funds? Okay. And somebody will very quickly say, fortitude's not possible. Okay? And that's a completely correct statement. You can't dramatically outperform the market over a 9-year period of time without any volatility. And what I was showing you with fortitude was Madoff's investments. So basically, fortitude is the reported returns of a feeder fund that invested 100% of their money in Madoff. And lots of smart people looked at those returns over an extended period of time, and nobody noticed. Now, Ann Tenbrunzel, my excellent colleague, I don't think I saw Ann here, but Ann has a wonderful term, ethical fading. And the idea of ethical fading is when I ask you, what do you invest in? Your mind focuses on high returns, low volatility. Those seem like two good properties for an investment decision. And ethicality, possibility, feasibility fade from the problem that you're addressing. And as a result, you could have many smart people who know you can't dramatically outperform the market over an extended period of time without any volatility, who continue to invest their money in Madoff, which happened on a quite regular basis. I would have expected to see some lower percent on fortitude as I show this problem to people in the investment community. And again, I haven't done it systematically, but there's no considerable drop. I always get at least 70% on fortitude. So I think that we can teach people to be more aware, to notice, and when it's time to speak up. Okay, reducing tribalism. And it says reducing rather than eliminating tribalism. So this is the same thing as valuing equality, and like everybody here is in favor of equality, except for the fact that you're not. And what I mean by that is there's just severe limits to your equality. So do you favor people at your own university over people at other universities? Do you favor people in your network over people in other networks? Many of my doctoral students have pointed out to me, we're pretty good, but we're not as good as you claim we are. So I'm not capable of complete equality of treatment of all people who are on the job market. I certainly have a bias toward my group. And for those of you who are clearing these hurdles and you're super human at equality, as soon as you think about your kids, any notion of equality breaks down quite dramatically. None of us even have an expectation that you're going to treat your children equally with the interests of others. In the utilitarian philosophy world, equality, it's interesting. What does equality mean? Does it mean that you assume that everybody has the same intelligence? Well, none of us believe that. Does it mean that we should admit people to our universities randomly so that they have an equal chance? None of us are really in favor of that. What utilitarian philosophers mean when they talk about equality is an equality of interest. That we treat the interests of all sentient beings equally so that we care about as much about the pain and pleasure of all sentient beings rather than treating everybody with complete equality. And again, that's just the North Star, so I put in the word reduce our tribalism rather than eliminate our tribalism, because none of us could possibly get to eliminating our tribalism. But I think a lot of us could think about ways in which we create less good in the world because of our preference for a subgroup of sentient beings. I just finished drafting the chapter on managing time for Better Not Perfect. And the idea well, first of all, I'm 64 tomorrow. Thank you. That's not that big of an accomplishment. But for my 50th birthday, my present to myself was, some of you don't give yourself birthday presents. I thought it was a good idea. My birthday present to myself for my 50th birthday was I quit the 4 editorial boards that sent me lots of papers. Okay, I wasn't mad at them. Okay, some of the editors were friends of mine, but I kind of did an audit of life, and to find out what tasks didn't I enjoy. Okay, and I came up with faculty meetings, and grading, and reviewing papers that I didn't like. So we all like reviewing a paper that we would want to read anyways, but reading papers that we wouldn't otherwise read and then need to write a couple of pages of comments trying to be nice when there's things that you just don't like, that's not fun. But kind of the next question is, but don't I have sort of a citizenship responsibility to review papers? And my answer is no. Okay, and so here's the argument, and you kind of have to assume that I'm a nice person who wants to do good, and if you can't accept that assumption, the rest of this may not work. But on reviewing papers, I am shockingly replaceable. I'm shockingly replaceable by a smart doctoral student. I'm shockingly replaceable by more junior faculty. And there's actually a lot of people who would like to receive more requests to review papers. Okay, there's definitely a time effect I haven't studied it, but I'm sure there's a time effect that the desirability of this reviewing task goes down over time. And if I'm replaceable, other people would like the task. Their motivation is probably more important than any knowledge that I've gained over the years. Okay? The value added of that task is shockingly small. So if I can find other tasks where I can provide more unique contribution, okay, to scholars or to the world, then I think that that's a far wiser thing to do. So for something that I don't think is in the literature, that might be sort of entertaining for you, is to just do my 50-year-old task of auditing yourself for tasks that you don't like, and in fact, your marginal contribution or your comparative advantage isn't that large. And this may give you a license to quit doing those things without feeling bad about yourself, because I've already developed this justification to a remarkable degree. Okay. And the last thing in terms of auditing, which this room is really good at, but one of the things that I find intriguing is that in the world of behavioral insights, and I'm thinking of the Nudge Unit in London and the many organizations that proliferate like that who want to create more good in the world, one of the tools that we've used is to not simply assume that our wisdom tells us what the best change is, but to experiment. And a lot of us are kind of stunned by the degree to which the ideas that we have, which we're sure are good, simply aren't. And the idea of experimenting, and I'm not thinking of us running lab experiments, but I'm thinking of just testing what works, is a remarkably good way for auditing our ethics. Okay. Okay. Finally, I talked about this utilitarian this kind of utilitarian North Star. And I want to tell you about, and there's a kind of a world called effective altruism, which I've alluded to as well. I want to tell you about one remarkable person by the name of Ian Ross. He's often written about as a hero of the effective altruism community, and I think he is a really, really good guy. He's a high-level Google employee making slightly under $500,000 a year. He's single, he has no plans of romantic attachment, he has no plans of having any pets. He lives in a bad neighborhood in San Francisco. He gets mugged occasionally, and he simply views that as the cost of doing as much good as he possibly can. Okay, so he lives on slightly under $10,000 a year out of his close to $500,000 income, and donates the rest in ways that he thinks are as effective as he possibly can, and he simply views himself as a vessel of the utilitarian world where his own personal happiness is a very minor consideration. Now, I find the story remarkable. A lot of people in the effective altruism community talk about Ian Ross, and I think that they're probably making a mistake in featuring him as much as they do. And this goes back to the fact that it's simply an impossible goal, and by having an impossible goal, you're more likely to have people reject the idea entirely. So what I'm really interested in is helping us move toward a maximal sustainable level of goodness that takes into consideration the cognitive and moral limitations that all of us have. Okay, so that's my preaching on leading a better life. But this is like my Lifetime Achievement Award, which is, thank you, which is nice to receive. It's organizational behavior. So we're talking about managers and leaders. And the main thing that I want to highlight is that, from what I can tell, the main thing that makes leaders different than other professionals is that leaders, managers, parents are responsible not just for their own decisions, but they're responsible for the decisions of other human beings as well. Okay? And that's kind of obvious, yet I would say that that hasn't been part of the leadership literature to date. Okay? We haven't thought about sort of the leader as a manager of other people's decisions. And I think that that's kind of a useful way to go. And I also kind of see a surprising separation between the Thaler and Sunstein nudge world and the OB leadership and management world, when in fact Thaler and Sunstein are talking about how would we construct an environment that would lead other people to make better decisions. Okay? But my talk isn't on, this part of the talk isn't on decision making, so I want to talk about sort of nudges for ethicality. Okay? And the idea is to think about how do we create an environment where other people are more likely to make more ethical decisions. And there are like 20-some slides left, and I see I have 10 minutes. So I'm going to kind of stop with this slide and tell you about what's on the remaining 20 slides. And I mean to sort of highlight, excuse me, sort of 3 nudges for ethicality. 3 things that managers could practically do that would lead their employees, their organizations toward greater ethicality. Okay? And I'll give examples from the world of equality primarily, but I think that this applies more broadly. If you want a more ethical decision, these nudges apply. Okay. So the first one is joint rather than separate. So long ago, I was kind of the co-creator of what's often described as joint separate preference reversals. And the quick intuition is that when you evaluate one option at a time, you tend to be very focused on emotive concerns. Our initial focus was on social comparison processes. If you got a job offer, let's assume you're on the rookie job market. I don't know what the rookie job market pays right now, but let's assume $150,000 is that amount of money. No need to be specific about whether that's 9 months or 12 months, et cetera, et cetera. But if you got an offer from a pretty good school and they offered you 155, but you heard that they made someone else an entry-level offer as well, and their offer was for 165, okay, you're kind of annoyed. Okay? In fact, that offer isn't as much fun as had they offered you 150, but you heard the other person was also offered 150. And what we show in this early work in the 1990s is that when you have one offer, you pay a dramatic amount of attention to social comparison processes, and you're perhaps more concerned with the delta on the difference than you are with a similar amount of change in how much money you're actually going to get. So in short form, one at a time, we're moderately obsessed with social comparison processes. But when people have two job offers at the same time, and let's assume it's 150, 150, and the other one's 155, 165, when we have two offers, we quit obsessing about the inequality within the place that made us the 155 offer. We do the calculation 155 is better than 150, and we're much happier with the higher paying offer. So the quick formula is one at a time, we are very responsive to our emotive concerns. And when we're comparing two or more options, then all of a sudden, we tend to do what's more cognitive. Okay, now we can, so I don't want to argue here what's the right decision, but simply that there's a difference between joint versus separate. But now I'll get more opinionated. What Iris Bonet and Alexandra Van Geen and I do in the context of hiring, and it's a lab-based hiring experiment, is that you're an employer, and we have a bunch of employees and employees means a row of data that we've already collected. And for simplicity, you're hiring somebody to do a math task for you. So think of math puzzles. And these employees have all solved puzzles in 2 stages. So you get 4 minutes, solve as many math puzzles as you can. The mean of the population is 10. Okay. And what we do is we show you one specific person, and it's a male or a female. They either solve 9 or 10 puzzles in stage 1, and you have a bunch of other filler information. And you're going to get paid bonus in this experiment based on how many puzzles your employee solves at stage 2. And you can either take the person we show you, or you can have a random draw from the distribution. And in simple form, we have a very large main effect. People want guys to solve their math puzzles. And this occurs even in a context where there is no difference between between men and women in our population in terms of ability to solve math puzzles. Okay. What's intriguing is that when we have the other condition, see 2 employees, one male, one female, one who solved 9, one who solved 10, all counterbalanced. So you can have employee A, you can have employee B, or you can have a random draw from the distribution. People entirely eliminate their gender bias, and they go with the person who solves math puzzles better. Okay? So basically, when people compare 2 or more employees, they use job-relevant criteria, and they quit using gender as a heuristic, and sexism basically disappears from the choices that people made in this task. Now, for the guys in the room who are worried about all the discrimination that we suffer on verbal jobs, we completely reverse this on verbal puzzles. It is true that people like women to solve their word puzzles for them, but they quit discriminating when they're picking between 2 or more, and they, again, return to going with the highest level performer. Okay, veil of ignorance, this one's a little bit of philosophical fun. So Rawls is the philosopher famous for the concept of veil of ignorance, where he argues that if we want to think about what's fair, what we need to do is abstract what we know about ourselves, what gender we are, how wealthy we are, what country we live in, and think about what would be the fairest solution from a neutral perspective without knowing our role in the world. And this is a very famous concept in philosophy. It's also kind of fun in the sense that Rawls thought of himself as an anti-utilitarian, which utilitarians simply think that he was confused about the concept of utility, or he would have understood that he was a utilitarian in many ways. But the interesting result is when we have people think about a puzzle, a problem in a lab with a veil of ignorance, then all of a sudden they make more utilitarian choices when we free them from the veil and ask them what decision would they make or how they would judge the decisions of other people. So if we can abstract ourselves from the moment of a moral decision and think about what we would generally believe to be the right thing to do, absent knowing our role in society, then all of a sudden we make more moral decisions. And finally, pre-commitment to objectives. And the idea here is, let's assume you're going to hire a new faculty member, and you're concerned that some of us are biased. Like, we like people from certain schools, we like people from, in the OB world, you could think of, we like micro people better than macro people. We could come up with lots of different ways in which we might have a tilt. The idea here is that if we start with a discussion on what our objectives are before we start arguing over the specific people, we then end up making more moral decisions. And this is a study with Linda Chang and Mina Chikaro and Iris Bonet. And basically what we do is we show that you reduce sexism in hiring decisions, again, for a math-related task, if you start with saying, what are you trying to accomplish? And simply thinking about the fact that I'd really like to hire somebody who can solve math puzzles, okay, when I'm going to get paid based on how many math puzzles they solve, reduces the propensity to want guys to solve your math puzzles. Okay, so I've, again, lots more slides, but I'm going to stop here on the grounds that I can't get to them, and basically summarize sort of where this kind of started. I'll skip the part where I need help from my friends because we kind of covered that. But what I want to build toward in the world of ethics is what I think that we already did on negotiations in the 1980s, what we did on decision-making in the early part of the millennium. And I hope that we can come up with more constructive ways of thinking, not about how to talk about ethics, not about how to discuss 30 cases on ethics, not about how to teach philosophy, not about how to preach, but if we focus our attention on what would actually create more ethical behavior, I think that that might very much shift the kind of work that we do. And I think that we can apply that both to thinking about our own individual level behavior, but I think we can also think about that in the context of the managerial behavior that's relevant in organizations as well. Thank you all for listening to this. It's early stage. Happy to receive comments from any of you. Thank you. Appreciate it.